So the story of Robin Hood is actually based on a series of tales from English folklore, and this is with the so-called The Tales of Robin Hood and His Merry Men, which was created by a series of anonymous balladers. The very first instance of him being mentioned is actually in the Piers Plowman, which we've covered in our video on when England became a nation, so I highly recommend that you check that video out. But cut a long story short, this story first appeared in around the 1370s. However, Walt Disney, from all the way back in 1937, so the same year that Snow White was released, he wanted to adapt a 12th century story of Reynard the Fox. However, he ended up deciding against this because he felt that animal heroes would turn off audiences. So obviously you think about Snow White, you think about many of the other films that came out after this period, you didn't have animals being the lead characters. And so at this point, Disney kind of decided that it wouldn't be a very good idea. Fast forward now to 1950, and you're having the live action film Treasure Island, and within that there were going to be 3 animated sequences, and one of them was going to be this Reynard the Fox. However, once again, this idea ended up being scrapped. Now fast forward to 1968, so this is 2 years after the death of Walt Disney, and people within the Disney studios are really coming together and they're thinking, what film can we do after the Aristocats, right? So, Jungle Book's just been released in 67, Aristocats is going to be scheduled to come out in 1970. What we're going to do in this post-Walt world. So on a fishing trip in October of 1968, this is where you had Ken Anderson, who was the director, with a studio executive, and this is Card Walker. And the two of them came together and they decided that they were going to do Robin Hood. So when they floated the idea to the studio, everyone loved it. And Wolfgang Reifman, who is the overarching director, he decided that Ken Anderson was going to be the one writing up the storyboard for this. So Ken Anderson, he got the story of Robin Hood and he got the story of Reynard the Fox, and he combined the two stories together, and this is how we end up having what would eventually become Robin Hood from 1973. However, one thing to note with what Ken Anderson wanted in his original is he wanted the setting for it to be in the Deep South. So the reason for this is because he wanted to rekindle the spirit of the Song of the South from 1946. But like we covered in that video, it obviously had a lot of controversies. And so they decided, maybe let's not kind of re-invoke the spirit of the Song of the South. And instead, let's just keep it traditional. Let's just keep it set in England, as have been many other adaptations of the film at that point. So for instance, you had Robin Hood and His Merry Men, which came out in 1952. So they kind of based the stories more off of that storyline in general. So that covers the story of the creative process that went into the making of the film. But now we have to just move on to the story of the studio. So first of all, we have to note that with Ken Anderson, he ended up, or in quotes, he ended up weeping as a result of how the animators and the other writers within the thing end up changing up his story. And what I mean by this is with regard to the characters and what animals were assigned to represent them. So what he wanted to do is kind of move away from stereotypes of certain animals being associated with certain things. So as one example of this, he wanted the Sheriff of Nottingham to instead be a goat. However, they end up changing it so that he'd end up being a wolf, because obviously wolves are associated with bad guys, etc., etc. And there were many other little changes like this that really annoyed him, because he wanted to be a bit more creative with it, rather than just kind of sticking to the kind of same animals that people know to be good or know to be bad and stuff, right? And then also we have to talk about the fact that instead of there being 12 merry men, as were in all of the original stories, instead, for the sake of simplicity, they decided that they were going to shrink it down. And actually, Ken Anderson was one of the driving forces behind this. And he decided that there was just going to be Little John. So the reason for this is because what they wanted to do is they wanted to basically create a parallel to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which came out in 1969. So this kind of duo of the main guy, and he's got a little sidekick, kind of like a Batman Robin kind of thing as well. That's what they kind of wanted to go for with regard to this film, and they felt that too many merry men would just kind of confuse the plot and just make things a bit too superfluous. However, this film ended up going a little bit too over budget, and this was partly as a result of all these different changes, but then also the fact that they kept auctioning different voice actors for the roles of the different characters within this. And so as a result of all this, the costs were mounting up, and so they now had to make some cuts. So if you've ever seen videos of this, which shows clips from Robin Hood, in particular the dance sequence that they have, if you compare it to many different clips that they have from different Disney films, that's where you can kind of see like how they cut corners, because they use many of the same animations from Snow White, from the Jungle Book, and from the Aristocats to kind of merge all this thing together. So that's something quite interesting in regard to that, in terms of, if you see the parallels, there's never a coincidence, right? Everything is all interconnected. There's a reason for everything. So if you ever see something in the role of cinema, there's a reason behind that. So now talk about the casting, which obviously helped the film to go way over budget. We're talking about the person doing the voice for Robin Hood, and this is Brian Bedford. So he was a Shakespearean actor. And actually, something to note is that Louis Prima, who played the role of King Louis in the Jungle Book, he actually wanted the role for Robin Hood. And so when he didn't end up getting the role, he actually was so angered by this that he ended up creating an entire album dedicated to this, which was called Let's Hear It for Robin Hood. And he actually ended up selling the rights to this album to Disney Corporation. But it's just a little bit of trivia in regard to that actually, the entire dynamics of the film would have been completely different. And actually, I'd argue the film would probably be much more successful if Louis Prima had got it, as opposed to this, Brian Bedford's guy that no one's really heard of. But anyway, that's my take. And then talking about Maid Marian, and this is voiced by Monica Evans. So she is also the same person who does the voice for Abigail Gabble in the Aristocats. And again, you also have Phil Harris, who also makes a comeback from the Aristocats, and he is the voice of Little John in this. But he's also the voice of Thomas O'Malley in the Aristocats, and he's the voice of Baloo in the Jungle Book. So I highly recommend that you check out those last two videos of ours, and all of our videos, just for more information in regards to this. Then also you have Roger Miller, and he does the voice of Alan Adele. So this is the narrator / singer throughout this film. And then next you have Andy Devine, and this is the voice of Friar Tuck. So if you've ever seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from 1962, absolute classic John Wayne film, Jimmy Stewart's in there, absolutely brilliant. So he's the kind of like sniveling guy within that. So that's the same person who is the voice of Friar Tuck. Next you have the voice of Prince John and also King Richard, and this is voiced by Peter Ustinov. So if you've ever seen Spartacus, if you've ever seen many other classic films from around that era, he is the voice of one of the senators within that. So very influential actor at the time, very distinct voice, and this is part of the reason why he was picked, because his voice is very upper class and it sounds very regal. Next you have the voice of Sir Hiss, and this is voiced by Terry Thomas. So if you've ever seen the film I'm All Right Jack, which is a classic British comedy film, he is one of the actors within that. Next you have Carol Shelley, and she is the voice of Lady Cluck, but she's also the voice of Amelia Gabble in the Aristocats. So it's funny that you have Monica Evans and Carol Shelley, both of whom play the voice of the two female geese within the Aristocats, and now again they've appeared in this film. Also from the Aristocats, you also have Pat Buttram and George Lindsay. So in that, they are the voice of the two dogs. This is Napoleon and Lafayette. But within this, Pat Buttram is the voice of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the Sheriff has two sidekicks. So this is Trigger and Nutsy. So George Lindsay plays the voice of Trigger, and you have Ken Curtis playing the voice of Nutsy. Next you have the two church mice. So this is voiced by John Fiedler, who is also the voice of Piglet, as well as Barbara Luddy, who we've covered in many of our other films as well, so definitely go and check those videos out. Next you also have Candy Candino. So he is the voice of the captain in this, and he's also the voice of the Indian chief in Peter Pan. So again, go and check that video out for more information. And then last but not least, you have J. Pat O'Malley, and he is the voice of Otto the blacksmith within this. So he's obviously in many Disney films. Like if you watch our videos, you're probably sick of hearing him because he's in so many things, but he's an absolutely brilliant voice actor. So yeah. So that explains the casting of it, and that explains the story of the studio. So you can kind of understand why the film kind of went over budget. But now we have to talk about the themes and the history. So I'd say that the main theme with regard to this is to do with one of class. Because in this film, all of the people who are on the side of the rich are either incompetent or heartless or both. Whereas the poor people, they're kind of seen as salt of the earth, good people, honest people. And so this is a theme which is kind of running throughout the entire thing. And this is emphasized as well by the kind of message which is, resonates within the Robin Hood story, which is, classic thing of steal from the rich to pay for the poor, right? So that's something which is like really emphasized again and again within this. You see the plight of the poor people compared to the greed of the rich people within this, and how, like, Robin is the hero for robbing the rich for the sake of the poor. Then also as well, you have this kind of anti-authoritarianism within the thing. And this is like a real kind of like rebellious nature which you have, and obviously, Robin is the hero within this. And actually the use of country music is quite striking within this, because country music is rooted in that kind of rebel spirit, of this kind of anti-establishment thing. And you can see this most clearly in the song that they make about Prince John, because this is a clear thing that you see within country music, where they're kind of poking fun at authority. And this is clearly illustrated within that song. So that covers the themes and the history, but now we have to talk about the legacy of the film. Now, the legacy of the film, it had very mixed reviews, and the reason for that is because